Hi, I'm Autumn,
And I'm Laura,
and together we're
the
the Boo
Boo
Sisters.
Sisters. So today we're talking about theaters eventually.
Yeah, we were going to talk about Tesla because I told you that there's this new fad. I don't know if it's a fad, but I'm seeing people on social media quote ghost hunt with Teslas because Teslas have this sensory, I guess, that can pick up people and when they're near your car. Have you
hmm
seen it?
I have seen brief clips about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's people that have been driving through graveyards and open areas where you can obviously see there's no people and it's showing people nearby. People are saying it's an interesting ghost hunting tool,
So to
but
describe this for people who maybe aren't used to watching the ghost shows, these figures are showing up not as a full-on person, but as a sort of stick figure, right?
it's not a stick figure. It is a person, but it's like a animated walking person on the computer screen. So it's not showing the actual person like me or you walking down the street. It's showing an outline of a person walking next to the
Okay.
car. Does that make
So that
sense?
makes me think of the outline of a dead body at a crime scene. Is that what it looks like?
Yes, except it's kind of like animated.
So
Yeah.
an animated dead body crime scene thing.
It looks more like a
We'll have
person.
to add a photo example
Okay.
somewhere on this episode so people can see what we're talking about.
Okay, we'll add one on our episode page of this episode. And when people haven't listened to it
They're gonna
yet,
be
they'll be
like,
like,
what is
what
this
is this
Tesla thing?
Tesla picture?
That's
But
great. It needs no explanation.
Jason Hawes of the original Ghost Hunters now has his own YouTube channel. And he recently rented a Tesla or got a Tesla, borrowed a Tesla, I don't know, to take it out for a day in different graveyards to test it out. And he basically kind of debunked it. The camera was showing people when there was no people, but in those exact same spots where a person supposedly was, there was a statue or a tall gravestone or a skinny tree or something
Ah,
to that
okay.
effect that might be throwing off the sensors. And if you go on YouTube and look at Tesla ghost hunting videos just randomly, they're doing this at night in graveyards where obviously there's not going to be any actual people walking around the graveyard and it's showing people, but you can't see if there's a tombstone right there or a statue right there because it's dark. I kind of feel like it needs more testing. That's just my personal opinion.
hmm
That's how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, because essentially, if it maps in everything that looks like it could be person shaped, roughly, like
Right. And I'm
there's so many
sure
things in that realm.
and I'm sure Tesla is trying to always improve and get better and better with identifying people versus statue, but it seems like right now it might not have the full awareness down.
Did he do any debunking on real life animals, like on a dog or a cow or a raccoon standing on the raccoon's shoulders or something?
No, but that would be hilarious.
Well, that would require some training, but the dog thing, everybody has, or knows somebody who has a pet to see if they would also map on there. I'm just curious what if there's like a height requirement to it, if it's a motion kind of
Yeah, they
thing.
were kind of chatting about that in the episode, like what kind of height or what kind of thickness or what kind of gravestone is it picking up? Because some gravestones were not reflecting on the system. And I think if you don't have a reliable source, you can't really trust, like, oh, that's a ghost, right?
Right.
If it's not accurately reflecting all the time.
So here's what Tesla should do. They should just equip an SLS camera in their Teslas instead.
Because they want to be ghost hunters cars.
Yes. Yes, they should. So today, Autumn, we are talking about theaters.
Yes.
And I came across something in the research of my theater that has nothing to do with my haunting, but I thought was really interesting. And you've been more involved with the theater than I have in your history, in your life, in your career, even. So I wanted to ask you if you knew anything about ghost lights in theaters.
Yeah. I love ghost lights.
You're like, I don't know what it is,
I
but
love
I
ghost
love the
lights.
name.
No, ghost lights are lights, typically very, very simple, that are put on stage or usually near the orchestra pit that it stays on after the theater closed or on dark days when no one is in the theater. So, and it's supposed to be just, it has many different meanings, but it's a reflection of this theater is still open and it will once again return to life. And it has legend in it that you're keeping the ghost the ghost light on for the spirits that might still roam the theater, so they have a way to quote perform or find the stage. um
Yeah, I thought that was so cool in a way because it's like a nod to the past performers saying you'll always have a home here and you'll always have a stage.
yeah, I love that too. It actually, I don't know what you read, but it has history, and legend has it that it first actually started because a burglar broke into a theater and it was so dark that he fell into the orchestra pit and really hurt himself. And so then he sued the theater. And
That's
from,
hilarious too.
yeah, and from that point forward, theaters started putting lights on in their theater when no one was there so they wouldn't get sued by stupid
By
people who,
burglars.
like, yeah, who broke in. So that's actually kind of a nod to how it got started. But it's, yeah, it's a great theater tradition. I particularly love that in COVID, during COVID, a lot of theaters kept a ghost light on during the whole shutdown. The ghost light actually became a really hopeful symbol for stagehands and for actors and for people who worked at the theater as a hopeful reminder that the theater is still here and once again will return to life. We're not closed. We're not shutting off the lights. We're still
Mhm.
going to come back. Being so involved in theater and loving it so much, I think that's such a hopeful, loving kind of warmth of the ghost light. I love it.
You pretty much summed it up, everything that I read in a nutshell.
Okay, good.
Good job. You passed your theater test. In my opinion, as well as many other people's opinion, every theater has a ghost.
That is correct.
And that's what we're here to talk about today. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Yay, Laura is going first. Get ready. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome to the stage our first performer of the evening, Laura, Boo
Oh,
Sister
that
number
gives
one.
me like such anxiety high moment of not wanting to be on stage. I was not a performer. I hated that being the center of attention.
Oh, great. Then I just called you forth. Well, the
I
spirits are
know.
with you.
Actually, that helps a little bit. So my theater today that I'm talking about is the James, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce this, the James Nederlander Theater in Chicago, Illinois. So the James Nederlander Theater has gone by many names and several, almost a dozen renovations throughout its history, dating back to 1903 when it was first built. As it was known then, the Iroquois Theatre cost over $1 million to build in 1903. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
equivalent to close to $30 million today. Yeah, so super expensive. It was elegant and beautiful. And while we don't have a lot of pictures of it back then, today the decor is a little bit different, but still is beautiful. Almost like a virtual art museum. It has large mosaics of an exotic prince and princess, an inner foyer with elephant throne lighting and multicolored glass Buddhas, and an auditorium of hashish dream design.
Wow. I'm not sure what that is, but it sounds elaborate.
It is. It's very elaborate. And again, if we'll include some pictures in
Hmm.
our post so you can look for yourself. But as I said, it didn't always look this way. It was always elegant, it was always ornate, and if you believe the newspapers back in 1903, absolutely fireproof. That's a quote.
From 1903, absolutely fireproof. That's like the unsinkable Titanic.
Right. So being fireproof back then was a crucial feature at the time due to the widespread phenomenon of theater fires across Chicago and the entire country during the 19th century. But as we know from history and what you just said, when something boasts itself as being unsinkable, undefeatable, or in this case, fireproof, it's probably a red flag that it isn't. In the first 6 weeks of its opening in Chicago in the winter of 1903, the Iroquois was showing Mr. Bluebeard, which was touted as a children's comedy musical about a man who is essentially a serial killer.
What?
So let me explain this to you. Have you ever heard the legend of Bluebeard?
No.
So it's this guy who marries a woman, then murders her and hides her in a closet. And he does this over and over until he has a closet full of dead past wives.
Oh my goodness. That sounds horrifying. And it's a play?
Yeah. And so again, this was considered family friendly, so much so that it was advertised in particular for parents to bring their children and even for teachers to bring their students.
What?
Reports from that time period, while the play was not well received by the critics, say it was made family friendly by having the murdered wives come back to life at the end in a comical way.
So, is this actually family friendly for the time? Because times change so much, or were people upset and like, no?
I took it as more like a, because we were just in this season, my mind's probably there, a Christmas Carol sort of thing where the ghosts of Christmas past and stuff like that can be super spooky and almost morbid. I think it was more broad back then, more accepted than it is now.
Okay.
On December 30th, all 1,724 seats of this beautiful new fireproof theater were completely packed, sold out. In addition, they sold a few hundred standing room only tickets, which was actually usual during the time to offer. That you could fill your space with as many people as you wanted and sell as many standing room tickets as you wanted to.
Right. Yeah, I found that too. But it's just like packed theaters. Yeah.
And then midway through the second act, a stage light sparked, and the spark ignited one of the oil painted backdrops and ropes. Backstage, the crew did everything they could to put out the flames. They used a powder called kill fire, as well as tried to pull down an asbestos curtain to smother it.
Oh
Sadly, neither
gosh.
method worked. The curtain got stuck in their efforts to pull it free and never fully came down.
Oh my gosh. Do you know, side note here, when I was researching my theater, I'm not going to talk about this in my story because it's not part of it, but there was a lot of fire accidents because oil lamps used to light the stage, right? All the way in front
Mm-hmm.
and all the way around. In one of the stories I read, this woman went up in flames in during a live performance because her gown caught fire and there was nothing they could do about it because the kill fire buckets were empty at the theater,
So
which is
not a
so
lot of
sad.
regulation going on,
Right,
to say the
exactly this
least.
time.
So this crowd at this performance began to see flames and smoke and the desperation of the crew. which created panic. One of the actors, Eddie Foy, appeared on stage to ask the crowd to leave in an orderly fashion and not panic, and he tried reassuring them by even singing a little song as they attempted to flee. But when the cast opened a back door to try to escape, a cold gust fed the flames, creating a backdraft that sent fire further across the stage and into the audience.
Oh no.
The crowd, keep in mind most of them women and children, surged to escape, struggling to find the fire exits, which were unlabeled and hidden behind numerous curtains. And the ones that were found had a special locking mechanism that no one could understand that was originally from Europe, in which the doors pushed inward instead of outward, like the doors we think of today that have a push bar. So they were essentially trapped with only one exit and too many people. The Chicago Tribune described it like this: the fire leapt from the stage as if from a furnace door. The draft from the open stage exits behind it drove it across the auditorium and upward to the galleries. Over a carpet of the dead, it forced its way through the chimney of the alley doors on the galleries.
That is a horrifying picture.
So the people on the upper level had it even worse than the people down in the auditorium. The upper level, with its cheaper seats, had its main staircase gated and locked by a metal accordion doors that were meant to keep the lower class from sneaking down to more expensive seats during the production.
Oh my goodness, it is the Titanic.
Right, but
Like
fire
it's
and
like
not
it's like
water.
opposite, right? Oh, instead of going up to the higher levels on the boat, you can't go down to like the lower
Yeah.
good seats. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, that's what I was picturing too. So as the fire raged, this forced many of these patrons in the upper levels to attempt to flee out onto the fire escapes. Unfortunately, the ladders of the escapes were frozen in place and many could not go down. A lucky few people were still able to crawl across thin boards and ladders that created bridges to the fire escapes across the alley to the building next door. Others attempted to do so but slipped and fell to their deaths, or the makeshift bridges would lose their purchase and fall, taking the patrons with them. So, as
oh
the fire
goodness.
ate away at the theater inside and smoke began to choke them, many people left on the fire escapes with no other means began to jump down to try to leave, or they got pushed in desperation by others. The fall itself was brutal, and most did not survive. Those who did were ones who had their falls broken by landing on the lifeless bodies of those who went before them.
Oh my gosh.
The fire only lasted 30 minutes, but in total, 602 people died.
Wow.
It would go on to be called the Great Chicago Fire Disaster. In a Chicago Tribune article from the day after, on December 31st, 1903, it says, the newest theater in Chicago, the Playhouse declared to be fireproof, burned till the stage was a steel skeleton and its wrecked interior a charnel house. 571 lives were destroyed by fire in the Iroquois Theatre in the 15 minutes between 3:15 and 3:30 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Of the dead, less than 100 were identified last night. Of the unidentified, nearly all were so badly burned that recognition was impossible. Only by trinkets and burned scraps of wearing apparel will the bodies of hundreds be made known to their families in the days to come.
That's so sad.
By contrast, it was only 300 people that died in the entirety of the well known Great Chicago Fire of 1871. To
Yeah.
this day, it remains the single deadliest single building fire in terms of loss of life in American history.
Really? Is it what spurred like fire safety laws? Like
Yes,
you
as a
have to have
matter of
so
fact.
Oh,
Let
great.
me let me
Okay.
get to that. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Something positive out of negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's also the single deadliest theater fire in the entire world.
Wow.
To your question, yes, the fire codes in 1903 didn't exist, but after this fire, new laws were put into place, like labeling fire exits, having lighting near them, or lighting them themselves. The fire exits also had to open outward after this point, And in 1904, the Library of Congress research guide notes that 19 theaters, opera houses, and museums were ordered shuttered due to fire code violations. And in Chicago in the same year, the mayor ordered all theaters closed for a fire code compliance review. So, yes, it did, in fact, make some positive change, some positive outcome to make things safe in the years to come. The majority of these deaths occurred by those who fell and jumped from the fire escapes.
Mm-hmm.
That little alley in the back, well, between the buildings, between the theater and the next door building, was dubbed Death Alley.
Oh gosh, yeah. So many bodies would
Yeah.
be piled up back there.
In fact, in the aftermath, the remainder of the burned corpses were also dragged out and piled on top of the other ones that were already there before being taken away. And some reports state that the bodies were piled as deep as 6 feet high.
Oh wow.
Amazingly enough, the theater building itself, the bones of the building, did not burn down completely, and it was reopened that same year as the Colonial Theater. In 1926, that theater, the Colonial, was torn down and a new one built in its place. This one named the Oriental Theater, and it hosted such stars as the Three Stooges, Judy Garland, and Duke Ellington. That theater closed in 1981 and was restored and reopened in 1988 as the Ford Center for the Performing Arts. And then in 2019, the theater was renamed once more to the James Nederlander Theater after the founder of Broadway in Chicago.
Okay.
So
I
that's
was
kind
gonna
of the
ask.
history of the crazy amount of refurbishments and stuff in its lifetime and the names that it's gone through. But it's
Yeah.
always been on the same land. So, despite
Okay.
this refurbishment and rebranding, the spirits of the original theater are said to still linger.
Does that alley still exist, or has it been like enveloped into the new buildings
Do
right
you mean
there?
enveloped? Enveloped.
I think enveloped also works.
It has been enveloped and mailed. No, since the fire in 1903, Death Alley has been a paranormal hotspot to city goers commuting and actors and stage crew still trafficking it to this day. So, no, it has not been enveloped. It is still an alley all throughout its history since that fire. There have been claims of the people that smell an overwhelming stench of burnt flesh in this alley.
Mm.
People have heard whisperings and their name being whispered, and they've seen a host of shadow figures lining the edges of the theater building. Those who dare to traverse it at night have said they have felt the grip of a multitude of icy hands clutching at them as if to pull them back into the alley and keep them there eternally.
What? That's creepy. The name whispering is interesting to me because all the other ones are kind of residual or kind of acting out what would have
Mm-hmm.
happened that night. But name whispering is more intelligent.
I was thinking a couple fold. One is that maybe cast members would practice their lines and things out in the alleyway at one point,
Mm,
and maybe it's a residual not of names being whispered but of lines being whispered, and that could be what people hear. And it's easy to think you hear your name being said in a whisper if you can't really make it out and you're trying to hear
right.
something. You kind of
Right, because
attribute
your
words
mind
you
tries
know.
to, yeah, make sense of what you're hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It could also be the residual. I was thinking of maybe families coming and trying to find their loved ones and calling to them or whispering to them.
Like in the, because families came and tried to search the piles.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
But it really creeped me out, this idea of not just like in normal hauntings, people say, "Oh, I got touched," or my shirt
Mm-hmm.
got tugged, but a multitude of hands gripping you and pulling
Right.
you back,
Yeah.
that's a little freakier.
But that's such a residual imagery. Put aside the alleyway for a second. If you're in a burning building, just
Mm-hmm.
natural instinct is to grab at people in front of you, right? To pull yourself ahead or to get ahead of them because everyone's trying to get out of this inferno.
Right. So maybe they're still trying to get out even to this
Right.
day, trying to
Like that's
claw
just
through
was like
people
that was their last mechanism of just clawing out.
and trying to survive. Yeah. So cast and crew to this day also report hauntings within the newer theater building. While performing, they've looked up to the balcony and seen shadow figures moving around, especially toward the very back. And they've reported seeing apparitions of people on the back stairs in period clothes from the turn of the century as well. These shadow figures and apparitions seem to be the most frequent phenomenon, which is, I thought, also interesting because many paranormal enthusiasts think that seeing a full bodied apparition is like the holy grail of having an experience or evidence that if you can capture it.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them have been captured in photographs, particularly in Death Alley.
Oh, interesting. Do you have like pictures we're gonna post on our website?
Yes, there are a variety of pictures that I found. Although, full disclosure, I don't know the validity of them. Obviously, we didn't take them firsthand. I think they're interesting, if nothing less, though.
Right. Always fun to look at, I think.
Yeah. Also interesting to me was that the building next door, which is now a Macy's, has some haunting in it too, especially on the eighth floor, which was used as a triage hospital and temporary morgue for the fire victims.
Oh,
Back in the day, it was a Marshall Fields department store,
okay.
but now that it's a Macy's, there have been offices and employee lockers up on the eighth floor, and they had to move the employee lockers because so many things were going missing that were reported, and the new hires were experiencing so many quote unquote weird things and then quitting.
Oh, I wonder why things would go missing. Is there any stories of weird things that made people quit?
No, I couldn't find any direct accounts of that, but I do have an account of somebody else who people might know. Back when the Nederlander was the Ford Center for the Performing Arts, it was host to the show Wicked, which a lot of
Okay.
people know. Cast member Anna Gasteyer, who played the witch, she had a bunch of ghost stories at the theater.
During the run of Wicked.
Yeah. So
Okay.
she said that that back alley was the gloomiest, darkest, and most dismal place, and nobody wanted to be there because of how terrible it constantly made people feel. She also said that during this climactic moment in the show where the witch is learning to fly, and there's all this smoke and fog that envelops the auditorium, that she very consistently would see people in the wings and out to the sides of the stage. And she said while there were a lot of stagehands on the production, it was much more people than it should have been there. And they looked like children as well as older people, like all different sizes.
Weird. So she's on stage. It's this
Mm-hmm.
dramatic moment she's supposed to be acting out, and she's seeing these apparitions or shadows or movements of people through
Mm-hmm.
the foggy smoke.
And then when she said she landed, there wouldn't be anybody there. And I was thinking, well, maybe the foggy smokiness, was almost like a trigger object to the people who died in the fire. And it made their apparitions come more to the surface, if you will. So if you were to go investigate there, maybe you would use one of those fog machines to try to like see if it would drum up more activity.
Yeah. But also, if she's flying, she can see things that other people can't from that height.
It also could, on the critic side of things, and the disbeliever side, could distort things on the sides of the stage because there's always props and other things over there, like waiting in the wings.
Right. That's where the ghost hunters should come in and try to debunk, get a fog machine in there and try to debunk, have someone like run around in the
Right.
fog and move it around.
Exactly. And maybe
Yeah.
even do the laser thing in the fog. Try that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
She also, while she was there, heard children's voices, and in the dressing room area in the hallway, she turned a corner once and found a woman at the end of the hall near the stairwell with two children, and they were in that turn of the century clothing. And then her first instinct was just, oh, they're actors. And she like nodded to them and went on. But then she turned another corner and came back thinking, oh, wait, they're not somebody I realize or notice or have seen before. And she turned back and they were gone. And
Mm.
this was before she knew about the Iroquois Theatre and the fire that happened.
Oh,
She was
that's so
only told that
strange.
after she told somebody the story,
Yeah.
her dresser about it, and her dresser told her.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So
Well,
that's the whole haunting in a nutshell and the things that have happened. But I do have something history wise that I think is really interesting to the fire. Maybe this is a reason why the spirits aren't at rest and why they could still be haunting. So while there were new laws and codes that were put into place, there were a couple things that were, I would say, definitely injustices about how this fire happened. So the fire
okay.
exit doors, there were more than any in the world at the time, which there were 30 in the building installed, which is one of the reasons it was supposed to be fireproof.
Because there's so many exits.
Mm-hmm. And as I
Okay.
already said, they weren't marked, they were difficult to open.
Mm-hmm.
And the theater owners said that they didn't want to mark them or light them because they thought it would be distracting from the shows.
Okay.
There were claims that some were even bolted closed to keep people from sneaking in and the theater from losing money.
Okay.
So the owners, in my opinion, might be a little more at fault, and there might be that injustice feeling there from the spirits. And building on that,
Hmm.
in their rush to open for the Christmas season, because they had put so much money into the theater and they were worried about the colder months and not doing as well, they tried to rush to open, and somebody, the owner manager, convinced the city to give them only a cursory safety inspection before it opened. And while it was never proven in court that corruption was involved, charges were actually filed and attempted against the owners and the manager and even the mayor.
Wow. To just rush and get it done.
But then those charges were eventually dropped because nothing could be proven. But the Smithsonian Magazine reported a definite, quote, indifference of city officials to well known violations at the theater. There was no fire alarm connected yet in the building, and the firefighters were only alerted when a stagehand pulled a manual alarm at a nearby building.
Oh my goodness. So you have a stage crew that had to run over to Macy's,
Well, at the time,
but not
Marshalls, but yeah,
Macy's, right? And pull the alarm there because they don't have one working. Oh my
yeah.
goodness.
So that's
That's
pretty
so
sad.
sad.
The loss could have been mitigated. Let's just say it that way.
That's too smart for how I would say
Oh,
it,
okay.
but
Had the fire escapes worked, had the fire exits opened, the people could have gotten free. I mean, some might have still been hurt. There might have been some loss of life, but it would not have been 600 plus people. The reason that they're haunting might be because they had this claim that this place was absolutely fireproof, and these mothers brought their children, and these teachers brought their students, trusting and believing in that
hmm,
claim, only to find that all these things didn't work and they were trapped inside. And
right.
how angry that could make you, even in the end, even in your final
Hmm,
moments, that you couldn't help these kids that you had brought there.
right.
So, Autumn, what is your Boo scale rating for the James Nederlander Theater?
So I feel the haunting itself isn't too scary for what people are seeing or feeling, but the emotional impact of what happened there could make it very scary. I would say a 2.5.
You can't give
But since we're not
halves.
doing halves, I guess I would go with a 3 just because it's so traumatic and there's so many kids and
And kid ghosts
something
are scary.
and the like the clawing situation of multiple hands grabbing at you is really scary. So yeah, I would say a 3.
Okay, I'll accept a three. I would probably also have given it a three because, yeah, that hand thing freaked me out a little bit. but
Mm-hmm.
also the sheer volume of the number of full body apparitions being seen. I think if you
Right.
were to turn a corner and see a full bodied person, if you had the right state of mind to think it could be a ghost, how scary that could be, especially if you knew you were there alone.
Right. But in my personal experience, I think it's so easy for that not to be your first thought ever. Right? That's never your first thought. Oh, ghost.
I'm
Even
pretty sure it's my first thought.
I don't think it is because if you're faced in the situation with sounds or seeing a full body apparition, I think your mind generally goes to what is most plausible. And what is most plausible is, oh, a burglar. Oh, another actor that I haven't seen before. Oh, this or that. And it's not until later that you realize I should have probably paid more attention because that didn't quite fit
Which is
reality.
why that actress turned around and went back, like, wait a second. I've not
Right.
seen those people here.
But it's in the split second that you recognize them. That's when the true investigation, I think, happens that you have to watch and interact and see what happens. But so often we don't get that chance because by the time we realize, oh, that doesn't fit in here, the moment's passed.
Yeah, and that energy that they might have used or that might have
Right.
happened in that moment is gone. So now you just have to start asking if you see anybody weird who you think, you know, oh, they're a burglar or another actor, just automatically assume they're a ghost. Ask them who they are
Yeah. How many
and why
people,
they're here.
if you're walking in New York City, walking from your apartment to work on a busy, crowded morning at rush hour, how many people that you pass on the street are actually ghosts?
That's kind of a funny thought. It could be.
Right. But you don't care to notice because there's 100 people you're passing on the way to work, walking to work because so many people are walking.
Or you look down an alleyway and you think, oh, there's a homeless
That's
person or
just a
something down
person.
there. Yeah.
Right. So many things could actually be what our mind is not interpreting it as. But you could honestly probably do a whole podcast on that.
And with
So,
that thought, Autumn, what's your theater for today?
okay. Today I am telling you about the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. According to several sources, the Theatre Royal could be the most haunted theatre in the world and certainly the most haunted in London. However, as a theater worker myself, I can tell you that all the theaters I've worked at are certainly haunted and they just might not be as well known as this one. But we're going to get into it and then you can decide for yourself if you think it might be the most haunted. Stanley Lupino, an English actor of the 1930s, just finished a comic performance at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane in London. Lupino is exhausted. He feels too tired to make the journey home after his show. He dims the dressing room lights and lays down on a small couch near the back of the dressing room. A few moments in the dark, and Lupino is suddenly aware he is not alone. He feels a presence in the room with him. He becomes paralyzed with fear. Then he hears the rustle of fabric. A curtain is being drawn, or clothes on the rack nearby are being shuffled. And then he sees a dark figure cross the room and exit through a closed door. In his exhausted daze, he hastily leaves the room and finds the caretaker to ask him if he has seen an intruder in the theater. The caretaker reassures them that they are alone in Drury Lane. Lupino returns to the dressing room and lays down once more, thinking he must have been in the middle of a dream. After a few minutes, once again in the dim dressing room, he hears a noise and sits upright. A dressing room mirror is in front of him. The reflection shows a face sitting next to his own image. It is deathly white, but unmistakably the face of Dan Leno. In Stanley Lupino's autobiography, he writes, "There was no mistaking that face. I had seen it many times in photographs and paintings. There was no doubt in my mind as I gazed at the reflection that I was looking into the face of Dan Leno." Later, he discovered that his dressing room, the one he was laying in, was the last one that Dan Leno used before his death. So,
Ooh.
this account I rewrote theatrically, but was written in Stanley Lupino's autobiography. So that's a first-hand account of him seeing and interacting with this ghost of Dan Leno.
So first of all, I want to say the man's got guts going back and laying down and trying to nap after seeing that in the room by
Yeah,
himself.
right.
And the second part of that is that mirror faces are one of my worst fears.
I
Even
know mirrors
today,
are
if
so
I'm like, if
scary.
I'm alone and I have a weird feeling in a bathroom, I purposefully do not look in the mirror. I wash my hands with my head down
That is
and
so
like move
funny
on.
because horror movies show that all the time, right? But I
Right.
purposely open my medicine cabinet mirror to brush my teeth so there's not a mirror in front of me after like I spit my
That's pretty
toothpaste out.
funny too. That's like the same thing, trying not to look in the mirror. Oh my
Okay.
goodness.
So again, that was in Stanley Lupino's autobiography about Dan Leno. So Dan Leno, he was born in 1960. He began clog dancing at the Theatre Royal at the age of 4. He became a famous comedic actor and was the highest paid performer of his time in the world. He ended up dying at the age of 44 after multiple struggles with mental health and alcoholism. The cause of his death is recorded as syphilis, but now some people think that his erratic behavior before his death was actually due to an undetermined or unfound at that time brain tumor. To this day, Dan Leno continues to haunt the Theatre Royale. Leno's ghost enjoys practicing his clogging in empty dressing rooms, and sometimes actors catch a whiff of lavender, which is a scent Leno always wore. So Dan Leno is only one of the many, many spirits that haunt the Theatre Royal on Drury Lane. But before I tell you the others, I'm going to give you a little history about the theater. The original theater was built in that place in 1663 by a man named Thomas Kilgrew. This date is important because this was right after a period called the Puritan Interregnum. I'm not going to say that correctly, but that's what we're going to go with,
Okay.
which lasted for 11 years after the execution of King Charles I in 1649. So during this period, all pastimes regarded as frivolous, such as going to the theaters, were banned. So then his son, King Charles II, comes along and he decides to give two parties permission to form new acting companies. Thomas Kilgrew, the owner of the Theatre Royal, owned one of these two permits and thus he built his theater on Drury Lane. The theater had to be constructed, though, as a site dedicated to legitimate drama, which were plays performed in the spoken word, not operas, concerts, or plays with any musical numbers.
Hmm.
This building was unfortunately destroyed not even 10 years later in 1672. It was then rebuilt 2 years later, and this was the largest and the longest lasting building. It lasted for 117 years. It was intentionally demolished and rebuilt again in 1794. Unfortunately, this new theater was also once again the victim of a fire nearly 15 years later in 1809. So the theater we know today dates back to 1812. It
Mm-hmm.
is now owned by Andrew Lloyd Webber, who restored the
Ooh.
theater back to its original look and aesthetic in 2013. So, regardless of its fiery past, it still is the oldest theater still in use in London today. So, for you other theater nerds out there, here are some of the really cool things that the theater has accomplished in its history. This theater has produced the effect of an earthquake by dramatically raising and lowering the stage with Victorian machinery. It
Ooh.
has recreated a sandstorm using several tons of biscuit flour. It is given the illusion of 400 actors sinking beneath the waves following a shipwreck. And it has orchestrated an alpine avalanche so realistic that it almost fatally crushed a cast member on stage. In addition, My Fair Lady opened there in 1958 at Drury Lane, starring Julie Andrews and Rex Harrison, and would go on to run for a record breaking 2,281 performances. So, those are just some cool things about theater.
I like that it has the realistic effects though. That's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
right. So, the hauntings. The most well known and most frequently cited ghost is called the Man in Gray. He wears an 18th century hat, wig, and cloak. A sword hangs at his waist, and riding boots complete his ensemble. He is seen in the fourth row of the upper circle, always in daytime hours between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. He always acts in the same exact way. He appears as a solid figure in the third seat at the end of that fourth row. Then he leisurely gets up, proceeds towards the rear gangway, and then disappears into the wall at the far end. Management and actors welcome his appearance as he most often appears during rehearsals. Rumor has it that his appearance means the show is fruitful and it will be great, and his absence means that your show is a big dud. So he basically doesn't waste time on crap shows.
He's like the Puxatawny Phil of theater.
Right. Will I show up? No, then your show's crap.
The
So
cast members are like, "Did you see him? Did you see him?" Oh no.
always watching out for him. This is actually documented. He was seen by cast members during all the shows that went on to be huge hits, including Oklahoma, The King and I, My Fair Lady, and Miss Saigon. However, he was never seen in rehearsals for the duds that didn't go on, the shows you never heard of, such as Pacific in 1960, which was a huge flop and opened there and ended only after 4 months. So, when refurbishment of the theater began in 1848, workmen carrying out work in the upper circle reported that a part of the main wall seemed to sound hollow. Upon demolishing it, to their amazement, a small room or part of a passageway was revealed. Amidst the dust and cobwebs lay a skeleton with a knife in its chest, with remnants of a gray clothing laying about it. Interestingly enough, this is the exact place in the wall where this gruesome discovery was made corresponds exactly with the part of the wall where the apparition disappears into.
Ooh.
So many legends have arisen as to his mysterious identity. Jack Hellman writes in his 1977 book, The Ghost Who's Who, says that his name is Arnold Woodruff. And he goes on to claim that he was stabbed in a stage brawl and then the murder was covered up, like the accidental murder during the stage brawl. However, a more commonly accepted theory, and one that is proposed by Walter McQueen Pope, who's the theater historian, says that this man had a girlfriend at the theater in the 19th century. She was possibly a favorite actress of a manager at the time. The man in gray was ordered out of the theater one night by the manager. A fight ensued, and he was fatally wounded by the dagger. The body was hastily walled up by management in a passageway that he would walk every night to meet his lover. Records actually show that during Victorian times, this upper gangway passageway was a route. It did exist where the skeleton was found. It was a connecting point to the third playhouse of the third theater that was built in 1794, but then burnt down in 1809. So it
Hmm.
was an actual passageway that was walled up for some reason. So, documented sightings began in the early 20th century. The biggest was in 1939 when almost the full cast of the Dancing Years was gathered for a cast photograph on stage, and they all saw the man in gray leave his third seat and go through the wall at the back of the gangway. Isn't that crazy? Imagine having a ghost experience where like 100 people see the same thing.
That probably has happened and people don't think anything of it when nobody else reacts. It's kind of like what we were just talking about. You could be passing people on the street and a dozen people see somebody and not think anything of it.
Right. But I think it's different when you all see a person go through a wall.
Well, then you're thinking, but think of all the special effects and stuff that are there. You're not thinking to yourself, wait, is this a special effect? Do they have a trap door wall?
Yeah, because it's all theater, right? So maybe
And
you're
your
just,
mind doesn't, as you said, it doesn't automatically want to think that's a ghost. It wants something reasonable and logical.
yeah, maybe the ghosts, I mean, the ghost in this is so well known that it was probably on the front of their minds where they all knew exactly what they were seeing. So Matt Clark, a lighting engineer from Bedfordshire, has worked as stage crew on two shows at Drury Lane, Miss Saigon and The Witches of Eastwick. During the preset, which is setting up the scenery for the night show, Matt has twice witnessed the man in gray and had this to say. Many people have seen the ghost in the upper circle, standing quite still and looking down upon the stage. Although I am interested in the supernatural, I didn't take these stories too seriously until I saw the man in gray for myself. I've now seen him twice, so I can honestly say that there is something or someone wandering the darkened theater before the audience arrives each night.
Mm.
In 1938, a member of the cleaning crew saw him during a rehearsal while she was cleaning the seats during her first day at the theater. She saw a figure sitting in the upper gangway and thinking he was an actor taking a break. Again, kind of going back to what we were saying. Like your
Mm-hmm.
mind just is like, oh, there's an actor taking a break. She started to approach him to see if he needed anything. As she did, he disappeared and then reappeared walking the gangway and disappeared through the back wall. She reported this to management and had never heard about the man in gray until she was informed after her sighting.
It always adds to the believability when somebody has no clue and sees something.
hmm During World War II, the theater was taken over by the ENSA, which provided entertainment for soldiers during the war. So several officers reported seeing the man in gray during their visits to the theater. Henry Oscar, during the same time, was on fire watch in the empty building in order to protect it. Oscar reported, there was no doubt in my mind that this was the same apparition that had habitually haunted the upper circle. It was certainly no mortal intruder, too shadowy in outline, besides being quite definitely in costume. The riding boots, gray breeches and coat, the ruffled short and tricone hat, even the sword hilt, were all plainly visible in the moment that I saw the figure. So there's all of these first-hand accounts. I just read you a soldier one, which again, like soldiers, policemen, firemen,
Mm-hmm.
all of those I think are really interesting. And to this day, nobody truly knows who the victim is or why he was killed. The remains they found ended up being buried in a graveyard nearby, unidentified. So then we get to our next ghost. His name is Charles Macklin. So this guy was an Irish actor And he worked at the Theatre Royal frequently. He was known, though, to add dramatic pauses into his acting and delivery while
You
a
know what
prompt.
that makes me think of? Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Is Joey's smell the fart acting on the soap operas where he
Yes.
has the dramatic pause and he looks around like
Yes.
he's thinking really hard and
Exactly. Like they actually have so during this time they have drawings, right, of the theater and him on stage and his face looks like Joey's part acting from Friends. So one night a prompter was invited to the theater to help the actors with their delivery and the prompter distracted Macklin audibly during a soliloquy, and Macklin went over to the prompter and punched him right in the face during the
all
show.
right then.
And he said to the audience, "The scoundrel had distracted me in the middle of my grand pause." And the audience gave him a thunderous applause.
That's
So
so
that's just
random.
like a little sneak peek into this guy's anger issues, maybe. In 1735, Charles Macklin had a backstage argument with Thomas Hallam over a wig that they both really wanted to wear. Hallam ended up giving up the wig since he considered Macklin his superior in position. But the ill-tempered Macklin would not let the scuffle go, and he kept baiting Hallam, saying, "Oh, I got the wig. You gave up. I'm stronger," whatever guys say. And Hallam ended up making a thrust at Macklin, and then Macklin yelled back, saying, "God damn you for a blackguard scrub rascal," and stuck Thomas with his cane, piercing Thomas's left eye and brain. So the incident occurred in the green room of the Theatre Royal Drury Lane in front of many witnesses. And Macklin, after the sudden fit of temper, seemed to be sorry and arranged for a physician to attend to Thomas. However, Thomas died of the injuries one day later. Macklin was then tried for murder. He conducted his own defense, and though he was not acquitted, he escaped with manslaughter charges because he claimed that him poking Thomas with his cane was actually in self defense. So later, he also tried to sue organizers of a riot of theater goers that tried to have him fired from the theater in 1772. So nearly 40 years later, he's clearly still upset about it because he's trying to sue these people who have trying to get him fired for a murder that happened decades ago. He continued to perform at the theater until he was 93 years old, when he abruptly announced his retirement in the smack middle of a performance. So this guy obviously craved the spotlight times 100. Charles ended up dying at the age of 97, and there's a memorial tablet for Macklin at the St. Paul's Church in Covent Garden. Ironically, the tablet his memorial is on depicts a dagger piercing the eye of a theatrical mask. Charles Macklin still haunts the Royal Theatre today. He's seen backstage, wandering the corridor, which now stands in the spot where he killed Thomas Hallam, as well as in the orchestra pit. And he's always seen during the same time that the incident occurred. So, and he's been seen by many witnesses, but I'm just interested on why he would haunt the spot. Like, is that regretful? Is he grieving?
Hmm.
Does he hate his memorial tablet? I don't know.
I would think that if he regretted it, as people said he did, he wouldn't have stuck around.
But did he regret it? Because he seemed like he was kind of feigning regret and kind of
That's what
just,
I'm saying. I don't think he
yeah.
was really.
So it's interesting that he might be stuck at this theater, why he feels his work's undone. Or maybe he's just like one of many thousands theater ghosts that just really loved his theater and that was his life. And so he's just still there. So this next guy I'm going to talk to you about is going to be your favorite one.
I don't know. I like the sword guy.
This one's going to be your favorite. And by favorite, I mean not your favorite.
Oh no.
Joseph Grimaldi. And you're about to find out why it's going to be your favorite.
Is he a clown?
Yes, he's a
Oh my
clown.
gosh. Why?
Okay, so it's a ghost clown, but get ready for it.
No.
So this was actually the first ghost I read about when I was researching what theater to do, and I was like, "Oh gosh, it has a ghost clown. I better just do
Here's
this one."
here's what you thought. You thought it has a ghost clown. This one will give me a 5 for sure.
That has to be up there with goat face or whatever. What is it? Sheep face.
Sheep
Ghost
face
clown.
and ghost clown. Okay, let's go.
Joseph Grimaldi was one of the UK's top performers, and he's often attributed to being the creator of the modern clown. So he did not really resemble the mime of the past, but more predominantly resembled the clown of we think of today with the iconic white face and roguish behavior and clownish ways. So he performed at many of London's theaters, with the Theatre Royal Drury Lane being one of his most regular living haunts. He started performing at the Theatre Royal at the age of 2. His extremely athletic performances were widely renowned, and he became one of the most celebrated actors and clowns in history. His performances were so hilarious that in one performance in 1807, it is recorded that a deaf and mute member of the audience, upon seeing Grimaldi, suddenly regained his power of speech and shouted out, "What a damn funny fellow." Unfortunately, the intensity of his performances gave him several physical health issues, and he retired from the stage. He had respiratory problems that left him breathless and joint problems that caused him a lot of chronic pain. He quickly spiraled into poverty after failed business ventures and being cheated by those he trusted to manage his wealth. His final performance was at Drury Lane in 1828 for a benefit, and he was carried on stage in a chair. Isn't that so sad? Like this sad ending for a clown. So he died in 1837 after a night of excessive drinking. In death, he's said to be a little mischievous and is known for giving a kick to actors, stage managers, ushers, and other theater staff. He moves props and wigs all around. He tugs on costumes and tailcoats and often gets in the way of people coming on and off stage. He has also, though, helped actresses by nudging them to their proper placement on stage or moving their body into a different position before delivering their crucial or comedic lines. So during Oklahoma, a number of cast changes had to be taken place, and Betty Jo Jones steps into this comedic role of Annie kind of last minute, and she's fairly new at acting. So for the first few shows, she's not getting the laughs that she knows the role is supposed to receive. She is, like I said, fairly inexperienced. So she writes in her autobiography that a few shows in, during the middle of a performance, she suddenly felt the soft pressure of hands on her shoulders, gently ushering her to a new position downstage. Then the hands lifted and repositioned her head into a new angle as she delivered her lines, and then received roaring laughter. Then it followed by a gentle pat on her back. She says, quote, "The helping hands gently guided her for the 3 following performances." And she became like a huge hit in that show. That was an interesting autobiography piece
Hmm.
to read because she so firmly describes what it felt like during the middle of
Mm.
the performance. And also, she's in the middle of her performance and can't like freak out about it. Betty Jo Jones's story was one of at least a dozen that I came across of actresses citing that they were repositioned in a way to
Hmm.
help them. Yeah, I read several accounts. Amanda Holden, who played Fiona in Shrek in 2011 to 2013, she recounts a ghostly experience in her biography, No Holding Back. Early on in the previews, I was doing a scene at sunset where I turned from a princess to an ogre. As I went to exit the stage, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a man standing where I was heading. Instinctively, I moved out of the way and said, "Oh, sorry, excuse me." When I came off, I said to Davina, that's a stagehand, "Who was that getting in the way of stage directions when I'm meant to be leaving the stage?" She told me that there was nobody there and she had seen no one. So she goes on to mention that she talks about this experience with some of the crew, and they're talking about the theater's ghost. And they're like, "Is it this guy? Is it this guy? Is it this person? Here's some of our ghosts." And she's like, "No, none of these are matching up. This is not the person I saw. No, no, no." And so she continues to believe for months that who she saw was a real person, that there was somebody messing up her cue. And then someone
She
tells
sounds kind of
her,
snarky about it. Like,
yeah,
okay,
like,
who is
"No, you're
messing
all
me?
wrong."
I need to figure this out. I'm so mad.
Right. So then she's told about Grimaldi and shown a picture of him, and she is shocked because the image, she's certain that is who she saw that night coming off stage. Those are some of the haunting recounts. But then Grimaldi requested that his head be severed from his body before he's buried when he dies.
Why?
I don't know. He's a clown, and that's what clowns like to do.
No. No, they
So,
don't.
this request is granted, and the two parts of his body are buried separated from each other. So, there are multiple reports of workers at the Theatre Royal who have reported seeing a floating, disembodied clown head in
No.
Grimaldi's famous clown makeup sitting behind
Stop
people
it.
in the theater's royal box during performances. So you're like an actor or you're backstage and you look up at the royal box or in the wings. So he's also seen as a floating cow head in the wings, right? You look over, your dresser, stagehands there, and then behind them you see a floating clown head. Oh my
That's
gosh.
really not okay. Just for the
Right.
record, I don't know why you would have your head severed from your body.
Yes. I don't know why you would, why is that a thing that you want to have done? So Joseph Grimaldi has a huge following to this day as the creator of the clown. So every year in May, on the date of his death, clowns visit Joseph Grimaldi Park in London at his grave, and they just sit there in silence and then they leave. So imagine you're like driving to work in May, past this park graveyard, and you just see a bunch of clowns sitting in it.
I could fully see that happening and not being okay afterward.
You're just like, la la la, on my way to work. You peer over at the graveyard, and there's like 200 clowns in it.
That would be when you go home and lock the door and, get out your zombie weapons.
Yeah. So that's the last ghost I'm going to talk about. So I can leave you with the floating clown head.
That's not ideal. because now I'm going to be thinking about that anytime I go to any sort of theater, like even
Yeah.
a movie
Or
theater.
like
I'm
thinking
going to
there could
be
be a
like, oh, there's probably a floating clown head somewhere.
or there's a floating clown head right behind you. So what is your boo rating?
I feel like I should give you negative points for the clown, but since that's not possible, I would say I'm going to give it a 3 as well. Because the clown head is freaky, but the clown himself, the man, seemed very nice. And the fact that he's supposedly helping people, but
And
I
that's
still give
probably
it
what
a
he's trying
3.
to do today.
I do think that the mystery of I'm just gonna call him the lover with the sword,
The
um,
lover with the sword.
which makes him sound kind of cute.
Sounds
But
hot.
yeah, I I think that that's a cool story, but not really scary.
Right.
And so really the only like true scary thing would be the clown head. And the other ghosts are just really interesting. And I definitely would want to go and investigate. That wraps up this episode of Boo Sisters. Thanks for listening. And as always, happy
Happy
hunting.
hunting.